Let's talk about compression artifacts. A frequent thing that comes up in compression discussions when I'm out doing training and also in response to some of the videos I've done is compression artifacts. What do they sound like? How do I know there's an artifact? And, honestly, I don't necessarily like calling these artifacts. I mean, I do sometimes, but they're just kind of a part of the way compressors work sometimes. So really, for me, it's more about when does a compressor not sound the way I want it to? I have a goal in mind usually when I start compressing something, and I just turn the knobs until I get there. But if you're starting out, it's harder to figure out what the knobs do. I know it took me a long time to figure some stuff out. So today I want to kind of demonstrate two of the primary issues that happen when compressors maybe aren't being used properly or maybe aren't being used in a way that we like. So the two main artifacts you usually hear about with compressors are pumping and breathing. Both of these effects generally stem from the way the release is set. So I have a snare drum recording here because snare drums are awesome. I just put a little bit of EQ on it and I have some compression on it. Here's that snare with the compression. All right, so a little bit of compression. Now, right now, it's kind of hard to hear artifacts. Well, mostly what I hear is, do I like the compression on the snare or don't I? I'm not exactly sure that this particular compression is helping the snare drum. I would need a full mix going to really understand that because compression is best applied in the context of a full mix. But for demonstration purposes, this is fine. Now, the first issue I want to talk about today is breathing. Breathing typically happens when our compressor release setting is too long. So I'm going to set this really long. And I'll increase the ratio and hit it kind of harder. All right, without the compression. Just so you know, that compressor is doing something. All right, sometimes the easiest way to kind of hear this is to add some noise into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add white noise into the background of the snare drum, and we're just going to kind of compress the whole thing. So here's that. Now, the thing to listen for is how the noise is kind of coming back up. The reason we call this artifact breathing is because it sounds like somebody is taking a breath. But to make it a little easier to kind of hear, I'm going to mute the snare drum so that all we'll hear is the effect of the compression on the noise. So that's breathing. You can kind of hear how the noise is kind of coming up. It sounds like somebody's taking a breath. In a full mix, you can kind of hear this sometimes on higher frequency instruments, maybe cymbals and some drum overheads or room mics that are being compressed quite a bit. If our release is slow, we can kind of hear those cymbals coming up. Sometimes it even sounds like cymbals are going backwards. There's some old Beatles recordings where that's going on. So again, it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes it's an effect. It's an aesthetic choice we get to make as mixers. But if it distracts from the music, then we start to call it breathing, and it's not something we want to hear. So just for grins, let's put the snare drum back in. So with it exaggerated, I can kind of hear it. But in a lot of ways, the snare drum kind of masks the breathing. And if I speed up our release faster, we're probably not going to hear much of it. This leads to another potential issue with compression, which is something we call pumping. Pumping usually happens when our compressor's release is set too fast, or let's just say on the faster side. So again, I'm going to mute the snare drum. So all we're going to hear is the noise, and I'm going to play around with the release so that it's pumping. So now we can just kind of hear the noise ducking down and then pumping back up. It's pumping the noise down and then everything comes back up. Pumping's not always a bad thing though, because we can actually get that pumping to kind of work with the groove of our song. If you listen to a lot of EDM stuff, this is an effect that they use in EDM and it works really well for that. So it's not always a bad thing, once again. So it's kind of sucking back up in the rhythm. You can kind of hear it a little bit. It's not perfectly in time. If I put the snare drum back in now, let's hear what it's doing. So now I can kind of get it. It's almost a musical thing. I can hear the snare and then I hear the noise. Snare, noise, snare, noise. Listen again. Now let's take a look at this in more of a mix setting. So what I have here are some stems from a mix I did probably earlier this year. I've just got the drums, the bass, and kind of the instruments. And I've got a little bit of compression on it along the lines of what I would do as a mix bus compressor. If I mute these stems, here, let's just listen to the mix bus. And I've got this set up for a couple of different ways to check it out. So here's with just a little bit of compression on the bus. So to me, it just gives it a little bit of glue, kind of makes the drums punch just a little bit more. That's why I like mix bus compression. Let's look at this in terms of when mix bus compression kind of goes wrong and we start getting some of those pumping artifacts. So I'm going to mess some stuff up. So what I did was I took these stems and I split them off into individual buses. And these compressors, they're all linked. And I have a subgroup of everything going to each compressor. So maybe this will make sense in a minute. Why did I do it this way? If I play it right now, so it's basically giving me the same result as if I was just listening to the mix bus. So now we can really mess with some stuff. And all of these compressors, as I said, they're all linked together. I can even open them and we can just see that they all kind of work together. So let's put some heavy compression on this mix, a lot heavier than I would normally do. And let's play around and see if we can make some stuff breathe. To make this a little more obvious, I am going to set it up so that only the drums are keying this compression. And let's mute all the other stems. So all we hear is the instrument stem. Now I can really hear kind of the guitars. If you just kind of try and focus on the guitars, I'm not sure how this will sound with YouTube compression, but just listen to the guitars as they're kind of coming back up. So now those guitars are making this, they're kind of breathing in the mix. If we turn everything back on, so that's more breathing. We can kind of hear the whole mix just kind of slowly coming back up. The instruments are slowly coming back in as that compression releases. What about pumping? So again, let's mute the other stems, and I'm going to speed up the release. Maybe something like that. Let's put everything back in. So with everything back in, the pumping to me is not nearly as noticeable. If anything, I just kind of feel like the whole thing is getting hit too hard with the compression. If I dial this back to more around what I would do, here, let's go. Now, if we mute the other stems, and it's not as noticeable. And that's kind of what we really want, at least what I usually want with compression. I can hear it here with the other instruments taken out, with the drums out. And let's put everything back into that compressor to trigger it. But in the context of the mix, it kind of disappears. What I hear with this compressor going now is it's just kind of gluing everything together. The drums feel like they're hitting a little harder, and maybe they're a little more aggressive, which I like, but it also feels like everything is kind of more together, but not too contained. It's probably a little more than what I would normally do. I usually like pretty low ratios on mixed bus compression, but if you're doing something with like an SSL style compressor, I'm usually around 4:1, so 4:1, not the end of the world. So that sounds a little closer to probably what I would be going for on a mix while I'm mixing. I hope this helps you kind of start to wrap your head around what compression artifacts start to sound like. One of the best things you can do if you're really trying to get your brain around these is, skip the YouTube video, shut this video off, go get some tracks, throw them in your DAW, and just start compressing the snot out of stuff. Go to extremes, make stuff sound bad, and listen to what happens. And start adjusting the controls to where things sound good. Bypass that compressor in and out. If it's better without the compressor, well, then don't compress it. If it's better with it, then you're starting to get on the right track. So If you got questions about compression, if you're looking for training, you can contact me at my website, www.goingto11.com. If you'd like to see samples of some of the mixes I've done, or if you're looking to hire somebody to mix your music, you can visit my other website, staglproductions.com, where I've got samples, and you can get in contact with me through either website, really. I'd love to hear from you. Hope this helps. I'll talk to you soon.